Howdy Summoners, as I'm sure you've noticed from your own testing, Chinese tournament results, and your favorite Riftbound players posting on Twitter, we are soon to be welcomed to the League of Draven. So the question is, how do you prepare for it? This is what we'll be discussing in today's video, specifically the following bullet points. The average Draven decklist, what does Draven do, what to expect, and why is it the boogeyman? Situational reads, identifying threat ranges, and picking shit to play around, decks that have game into Draven, and thoughts from other top players. This right here is the average Draven decklist that you're going to see when you sit across from a Draven player. Generally speaking, you're going to see these battlefields, you're going to see these 2 drops, you're going to see Draven for the Chosen Champion, some amount of Kaisas, some amount of Dariuses, some amount of Ferris Forerunners, Cleave or Blood Rush, stack decks. Generally speaking, they'll be on Falling Stars, max copies of Fight or Flight. They may or may not be on Hard Bargain in the main. They will almost always be on at least 2 Rebuke. Some may or may not be on Switcheroo. They'll be on a couple copies of Longsword or Edge of Night, and max copies of Spinning Axes. And the sideboards are always generally pretty similar. A couple copies of Bryn here, Hard Bargains, Thermo Beams, and Assembly Rig for the Victors. A couple of variations you might see are Bryn here's in the main, Hard Bargains in the main. Some lists are playing Fizz, some lists are not on Tide Turner, they're on Gem Jammer. The battlefields may be Obelisk instead of Treasure Hoard. But with the exception of the Miracle or Storm Draven specifically, this is generally what you can expect a Draven decklist to be playing in terms of card pool, as well as ratios, so on, so forth. Nothing special. There's usually no spice, no crazy text, right? It's just different ratios, and onesies and twosies have been swapped around, like I've stated previously. All right, so what does Draven even do? Draven wins combat via the best possible interaction suite printed, like Fight or Flight, Rebuke, Spinning Axes, Switcheroo, and Longsword. There's some other cards that I'm not going to get into, but they're pretty important. We'll cover them later. It also gets to play some of the best units in the game, like Kaisa Survivor, Darius Triferian, Brynhir Thundersong, Overzealous Fan, and of course, Draven Vanquisher himself. Because of the fact he gets to play both the best interaction and the best units in the game, he also never loses combat and never bricks. Now, we do play a card game, so bricks happen, but the way the deck is built and how Riftbound naturally flows, it's pretty hard to draw hands in this deck where you just auto-lose, especially because your chosen champion is just so strong and you have permanent access to it. Even last set, the best decks occasionally had hands that were just really tough to win with. I mean, Annie, no 2-drop, no sneaky, and pray you draw Kaisa to develop. Kaisa drawing a bunch of spells that don't do anything against like a Pouty Poro, and then you have no units. For an Aurora deck, Yi, no 2-drop, no ramp, Aurora missing ramp, Aurora, right? But this deck, even your worst opener, like no 2-drop, no stack deck, not just like hard pass, you still get to play one of the best chosen champions in the game turn 2. Which, don't get me wrong, still doesn't feel that great, but it's much better than some of the previous scenarios that I have covered. The next thing that a lot of other decks can't do is that it can abuse both even and odd curves very effectively. And what I mean by that is like a 2, 4, 6, 8 curve means 2-drop, Draven, Darius Cleave options 3rd turn, which is obviously really good. And our odd curve enables the exact same thing, except turn 1 we get a stack deck, turn 2 we can hide a Switcheroo, or turn 3 we get Darius Cleave and another card to play with, or we can pay for our Draven's activated ability and still get Darius Cleave. Reading situations and altering your play pattern. A lot of below average Draven players, which you will most certainly run into, and even some higher level players, my teammate Dimitri has called me out on this in testing myself, have a horrible habit of accidentally and silently straight up telling you what they are representing if you are paying close enough attention. Now, just telling you what to look out for is tough to do on a video because, frankly, it requires playtesting and watching how your opponent plays and making reads off basic situational information and a whole bunch of other information that I just can't give you in a video. But I'm going to do my best, and I have a great example of something I have observed in one of my local players who asked me to do some Spiritforged games with them since they hadn't got to play it yet. They did this same play 3 times in the span of our match. The first time is a little harder to read, of course, but as soon as it happened, I committed to memory, as well as the previous sequences and information and so on and so forth. And the second and third time it happened, with similar information presented, I had the perfect read. The play I'm referencing is he would either hard play a treasure hunter to a battlefield he controlled, then hide a card, or move a treasure hunter into a battlefield he controlled with a hidden that was hidden after treasure hunter was already in play, and leave it there. Now, to some of you, you might be screaming that you immediately know what the hidden card is, and I'll give you a second to think about what the hidden card is. Put it in the comments. Alright, guess is in. The correct answer was switcheroo. Now, some of you immediately were like, alright, that's the most obvious switcheroo ever, which is great. The problem is, that's not a good mindset to have, and I'll get to that shortly. Some of you were like, hell, I don't know what card it is, which is fine. Hopefully this video will be helpful. The highest level players watching this video would have likely thought, well, that's just not enough info. I don't know what they were doing in previous turns, cards that were played, what battlefield, what deck Nova is playing, what the rune situation is, what the tempo situation is, or any combination of the information I'm referencing. Making reads and identifying threat ranges and what you lose to is based on information presented in that game or that match, and a general knowledge of what some Draven lists look like and the general pacing of Draven. Coming in with preconceived notions of treasure hunter played to a battlefield, card hidden equals switcheroo is how you get punished, which segues me into the next section of altering your play pattern. Sometimes you need to alter your play pattern throughout a match to throw your opponent off. Like I said earlier, if on the third time of him making that play with the general same sequence, instead of hiding switcheroo, he hid fight or flight, and I go in with the read that it's switcheroo, then a fight or flight punishes me much worse than a switcheroo does, because I'm playing around switcheroo with my calculations and my crackbacks and so on and so forth, right? But because he made the same play every single time, I didn't have to account for that. I just knew it was switcheroo, and I had to make my plays based off the fact it was switcheroo. Another common way of doing this is if you've whiffed on all your interaction suite all game, feign confidence when going in for a 50-50 play. Represent better cards than you have. When you draw your card for turn, even if it's a brick, crack a smile, peek over at points, and audibly calculate the might of some units, you know what I mean? Or if you've played hyper aggressively and have had everything all game, like you've just drawn broken, feign the inverse, right? Pretend like, it finally had to stop, play conservatively. Signal that your hand might be weaker, which could segue you into an easy blowout because your opponent is reading that signal, which is false, right? We can further alter our play pattern by not just playing the game on autopilot like we would with other decks. A lot of the time we'll play a 2-drop pass, opponent plays a 2-drop, passes back to you, you move your 2-drop in, get a point, develop a unit, pass. Well, Draven punishes you for that. Oftentimes, the correct play is not to conquer the first chance you get without calculating what the next 2 turns is going to look like. Oftentimes, Draven will play a 2-drop, pass to you, you play a 2-drop. Goes back to them, they'll score a battlefield and play Draven in the back, then it comes back to you. If you conquer, sure, you're going to get a point, but they have a Draven in the back, ready to come in, take the point back, generate card draw, and a gold. Sometimes you have to preserve board tempo and unit presence in exchange for point tempo, depending on what your hand looks like. If your deck plays removal, oftentimes spending early runes to clean up their Draven and or overzealous Fand and such is a very good play and is perfectly fine. I know it feels bad, but I promise, do some testing, just rip a Falling Star or a Piercing Light, and you're going to be like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. That was actually pretty good, right? There's a reason the best players and the best content creators are going by the meme, dies to Falling Star, shout out Challenger TCG, because removal is pretty good. The next piece is do your best to force action from your opponents rather than playing into them. Don't just give free combats from throwing units in, A good example is arbitrarily throwing units into their Reaver's row for a free point. And then you're like, oh, well, I can just retreat. Because in the past, a common play pattern would be like, play Kaisa, move Kaisa into Reavers because you're going to get a draw. And when they try to come in and kill it with like a Darius or something, you're just going to move it back. Well, now, guess what? They move in a Draven. Not only do they get the point back, not only do they get the card draw, but they also get a gold gear token. You know what I mean? So there are just so many punishes for just arbitrarily moving units in without thinking, what do I get punished by? You just can't play Riftbound on autopilot anymore against this deck because you will be punished, and then you're going to be like, oh, Draven's unbeatable, blah, blah, blah. Don't say Nova didn't tell you. The next piece that is tough to communicate over a video that comes from just testing and time with your hands on the cardboard is identifying threat ranges and picking a selection to play around. You generally can't play around everything. You just can't. Maybe you can play around a switcheroo, a fight or flight, and even ride the wind, but you can't beat Rebuke. It's important to consider a few things. Is this a make or break situation where you have to go for it or lose anyway? If so, make the play around whatever threat ranges you can reasonably play around with information provided. You're losing whether they have it and you go in, or they don't and you don't go in. So just make the most reasonable play possible with the information that's been presented to you. The next thing is how many copies of the card that you're considering have been publicly seen? Trash, revealed from an effect, or put to bottom, or put in the hand. And how many cards do they play in terms of ratios? It's not uncommon for Fight or Flight to be a 3 of, but Rebuke is typically played at 2. And if both are in the trash, well, then no shit, you don't have to play around Rebuke. Now, this seems obvious, but I've, noticed a lot of players go on autopilot, and after the game, they're like, oh, well, I lost to Fight or Flight, but I played around Rebuke, and, I'm like, well, both Rebukes are on the bottom of the deck because, from whatever game effect. The information was presented to them, they just didn't internalize it, or they were on autopilot, so they didn't write it down, or they just didn't care enough to process that information. The second piece is, are you in a position where action is truly being forced? A lot of players make the mistake of feeling early pressure because they keep looking at their notepad and seeing, 3 points or 4 points, which means, oh god, next turn will be 5, and which could really be 6 if they have a Kaisa or Darius. And oh, what if they have Ride the Wind and they can score on my turn, which means it's going to be 7 then 8. You just can't do that. You have to take the information being presented to you and determine if you need to act this turn, and if you do, what are the most likely cards they have based on the information presented, what cards can you beat, and what cards do you lose to, and how bad do you lose? Is it a unit or two and some tempo that you can recover from given whatever circumstance, or is the game effectively over with no chance of recovery, which it often is against Draven. That's just the nature of the matchup. The biggest thing in closing is get some testing in. Join the Riftbound community Discord, join my Discord, go on Twitter, join Challenger TCG's Discord, and just ask to play against Draven on TCG Arena. Get some games in, get the flow of the deck down, and learn what to expect when it's actually played. This will put you massively ahead of the curve of your local players for your skirmishes and or Rift releases, and ahead of the curve for quite a few of the entrants at both of the RQs in February. For decks that can play into Draven specifically, meaning they're good into a specific axis of Draven for one reason or another, which I'm not going to go super in depth. I'm mostly just going to cover them at a high level and provide a generic list of the deck, right? So the first one is the Unitless Victor. Now, Unitless Victor is specifically decent into Draven because it plays a lot of removal, and you win because your ability to generate units that you just don't care about is in your legend zone, right? And it's 1 mana. So the idea is you play a bunch of removal, you kill all of Draven's dudes, you don't send tokens in to their guys until they're dead, so they never get to draw a card. And without winning combats, other than stack deck, Draven doesn't really draw cards, at least traditional Draven anyway. So that is the theory, right? And you also get to play Vile Maws, which turns off like Fight or Flight, Overzealous Fan. So it's a decent enough strategy into Draven, traditional Draven. The next one is Misfortune Aurora, and I think MF Aurora is specifically good because Aurora naturally doesn't operate on the same combat axis as most Riftbound decks do, right? You tend to just not really do anything with units until you play Aurora, and then you start playing huge units in which you get to, Thought Seize their hand and pick out the problem cards and then move in with 50,000 might, or you get to just pick their might up and move it away with like a gust or a bullet time or a challenge. So it tends to give you some okay games into Draven. You can also play a really funny combo in Temptation and Vile Mausoleer, so you could just Temptation like 4 of their guys into Vile Mausoleer, and then they're stuck there perpetually, where you can send in a couple of Mountain Drakes, a couple of Dead Blooms, and they're just not very happy about it. Or a Bullet Time, and there you go, right? That's kind of the idea. And the very last deck I'm going to talk about is one a lot of people are talking about, and that is Rat Pack Ezreal. Specifically playing the Pit Rookie as well as Cole to kind of move around, make your guys huge, get a bunch of gold so you can play a bunch of expensive stuff for effectively free. You get Card Sharp early, you get Boots of Swiftness for ganking. You play the Slight Storm package with Miracle Seals and Called Shot because, it's an Ezreal deck. Arcane Shift Watcher, and then you can Accelerate Watcher in for effectively free is a pretty good play. Because you're also purple, you get the good purple cards, which, once again, going back to it, if your deck is playing purple, it's automatically at least pretty okay, and you get the benefit of having the ability to also play Ezreal, which, as you guys are probably well aware with some of the talk lately, Ezreal's pretty good. Same with that Cult Shot card. Who would have thought that effectively free Scry 4 Draw 2 would be strong? And you get to do Time Warp Cheese late in the game. So all in all, it's a pretty good package. You also get the access to removal cards like Frigid Touch. You get Singularity. You get the Rebukes. You get Hard Bargains. And you get to play Ornn 2 and 3. Bring in a Deflect 2 unit that gets enormous in the late game because of all the gold you generate. Other top players and creators have been gracious enough to give us some of their time to share their thoughts on how to approach the Draven matchup and strategies they're considering for the upcoming regional qualifiers. So big shout out to TheHatCase, Dizzee, Moe, and E3 TCG for their time. Check out their socials linked below, and let's see what they have to say.
Draven, whether it be Miracle or mid-range, presents an interesting case to what you have to be doing in Set 2 Riftbound. I think that it doesn't necessarily matter what strategy you're playing, but the existence of Draven as a deck asks you, as a player, to do something either incredibly unfair or very, very above rate when it comes to being efficient. I think as long as you are playing a deck that fulfills one of these two things, be it IRELIA, who tends to ignore combat, that also can go for a deck like Aurora or Ezreal, or maybe something like blue-green Ornn, who tends to just be the most efficient thing when it comes to producing might, can give you some game into these purple decks. The bigger issue that you will have to solve as a player is making sure that you can do that consistently, especially when compared to how consistently Draven gets to fulfill his game plan in both mid-range, in maintaining his tempo through card draw and purple move spells, or Miracle simply seeing their entire deck and having the answers necessary to both execute their game plan as well as disrupt yours.
Hey everybody, Mo here, and the way I'm looking to beat Draven right now, and the way I think is going to be the best way to attack the Draven mid-range deck, is usually going to try and find ways to deal with them outside of combat, so that way if things do go awry, or they have some sort of trick in response to whatever it is you're doing, they don't just get a free card draw and it's not going to be a cantrip. A lot of the stuff that they have isn't actually reaction speed, so if you can do something that fights your opponent's unit, or tries to control the board outside of, like I said, a combat or a showdown, that doesn't let them them play action speed cards and spells, it makes it really, it's a lot better for you to be able to try and fight them that way. So the cards I'm looking to do this are a lot of cards like Challenge, which is a way to try and kill their unit, whether it's on a battlefield or in the base if they're setting up, without having an action, a showdown start. Snapvine is a really good card since Draven oftentimes likes to leave their units on the battlefield, and if they respond with something like an axe or a weapon in response to your Snapvine trigger, a lot of colors right now with Snapvine is going to play some sort of pump spell with your Snapvine, or now is when you get to attack and afterwards, now that their Draven has at least 6 damage on it, and I think that's a pretty good way to try to fight Draven. So that's really it. I'm just trying to find ways to beat Draven outside of showdowns and outside of combat, so that way if they do have some sort of reaction and it goes in their favor, they at least don't draw a card. But the most part is because they just don't play a lot of reactions to begin with, most of the cards and most of the stuff that they have is going to be action speed.
What's up, y'all? It's your boy Dizzee, and I heard you want to beat Draven. So the first thing you want to do if you want to beat Draven and not join him is to find a deck that you're comfortable on that has plenty of options to tech into Draven. You want your main deck to be teched out to deal with Draven because it's going to be most of the field in pretty much any tournament that you go to, especially bigger tournaments. So you want, you know, each color has its own tools: Charm, Bellows, Watcher, Singularity. Red has plenty of cards, yellow has plenty of cards like Imperial Decree, orange has Punch First. You want to include as many of those as possible in your main deck to deal with the combat tricks, because Draven is going to try to fight you, especially if you're ahead in point tempo. Try to be a little aggressive early on. Don't be afraid to like score early points because you want point tempo. That's the most important thing. And when you are going to go fight him at the battlefield that he's stacking up on, just make sure that you're calculating +3 might every time if you're using removal spells. And again, when you're going to fight him, just assume he has it. Don't play against a Draven. Well, if he has it, he has it. You're gonna lose, because with 10 cards in hand, I can guarantee you he has it. So just do your best to play to your odds, I guess. That's the best way I can put it. You want to basically just assume that they have it and play around the worst possible scenario. I know that sounds easier said than done. It's why the deck is so good, because it's red and purple. It has the best tools in the game right now. But there are ways to beat it. Like I said, every color has tools. You just want to maximize those tools in your main deck, and then leave your side deck to deal with the less common matchups you think you're going to see. And yeah, just make sure that you study the deck, know all of the combat tricks, and pay attention to how many runes they have up and how much interaction they can actually give. If you're playing spells, always try to play a spell if you have 2 to 4 that you could pay for a hard bargain, because I know that Dravens are leaning more into that card now. I think they're all probably going to be on at least one main deck, and of course they're going to side them. So game 2 and game 3 especially. Obviously, try to build a deck that can deal with those combat tricks or doesn't go into combat with him if possible. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Good luck, and hope to see you guys at Vegas.
What's good, everyone? E3 TCG here. I was one of the lucky ones who was able to snag a competitor badge for the upcoming Las Vegas Regional Championship, and as an off-meta gamer myself, I am not looking to be playing Draven in the regional. That being said, I am looking at some strategies that I think have a decent chance up against Draven, and I'll explain a little bit why. The first thing to understand is part of the reason why Draven is such a good deck is that when it wins combat, it gets free pluses. The 2 decks I'm looking at are going to give them the least amount of opportunities to win early combats and therefore snowball their advantage. That being said, Draven still does have a lot of potential with the Azraels and stuff like that, depending on which build it is. The first deck I'm looking at is this Severe Aurora deck. This deck has a lot of potential because I think the Last Rites plus Mind Splitter combination bridging into the late game is actually really good against Draven. Draven's key pieces of interaction are going to be Rebuke or Fight or Flight, and Mind Splitter does a pretty good job of just snagging those straight out of the hand, and then once you have taken their key piece of interaction away, you can back it up with a Punch First and your own Rebuke and your own Fight or Flight, and you get to sort of play the same game they're playing, but instead you have more might, and you have the hand rip on your side. You dominate the board this way, you move into the late game this way with infinite resources, and Dazzling Aurora gets you the opportunity at a lot of free spells to be able to fight the same fight that the unfair Draven decks may be fighting with their free units that they may or may not be utilizing. I think this is probably my frontrunner choice. A few other cards that help in that matchup in the side are going to be the Invert Timelines. Draven holds a big hand. You can equalize the battlefield, or not battlefield, but the playing field with Invert Timelines fairly easily that way. And you also get to play cards like the Paper Tree against Draven, which help you ramp passively when they try to aggro you out. This is definitely my front runner, but if I can't get it to be performing at the level I need it to be, the next deck I'm looking at is actually Creatureless Victor, which is the same thing, same sort of concept where you don't let them win early combats, don't give them what they want, which is nice rebukes and nice free pluses, and you just focus on taking out all of their units. It's a very straightforward deck. It's not my cup of tea for playing long events because managing kill spells over long events, you really have to have your brain turned on for every single game that you play. With enough reps, of course, I think this is a great strategy to take down a lot of the more common decks that you'll probably face, because I don't expect Aurora to be super popular, but this deck is going to be a very difficult mental task in order to face off against a lot of things. I also do think that this deck may struggle against some of the more powerful and more low-to-the-ground decks like Annie, which may still see popularity due to the card availability of Draven moving into the event. That being said, these are my two strategies that I think have a pretty good chance up against Draven. I've kind of explained a little bit why. Strong ETB effects, strong might, take away their rebukes, make their rebukes bad, make their early combats not net them pluses, and you should have a path to victory. Before I head out, make sure you guys are subscribed to DizzeeRiftbound on YouTube. Just take a second to click that subscribe button, get our boy to 1,000 so we can start earning on these awesome videos.